Chapter 70, Seeking Revenge for the Smallest Grievance. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 70. Seeking Revenge for the Smallest Grievance. Ji Hao flapped the pair of fiery wings, transformed into a thin beam of fiery light and flashed across the air, and appeared right in front of Blackwater Jiao. Ji Hao raised the long spear high and pierced it into the old Magus priest's chest. While the old Magus priest was trying very hard to resist Ape's attack, the long spear easily broke through the wisps of black smoke that had been wrapped around his body, and punctured his heart. Fiery sparks burst out from his wound, a raging flame suddenly had spurted out from the old Magus priest's body. The old Magus priest let a howl out in pain and despair. Huge flames spurted out from every single pore of his, and burnt him into ash in the blink of an eye. "You damn little bastard!" Blackwater Jiao popped up his eyes, and barked out in rage. "Well, my Abba is simple and generous, always putting the clan's profits on the first priority, therefore, it's inevitable that people might think he's a pushover." Ji Hao swung the long spear over, bringing up countless afterimages, which were rotating fast around Blackwater Jiao's body, then suddenly pierced the spear towards Blackwater Jiao. Another Blackwater Serpent Clan senior Magus holding his longsword, darted up behind Blackwater Jiao with his waist bended, attempted to attack Ape, who was holding his huge wooden stick and was madly hitting Blackwater Jiao. However, Ji Hao moved even faster than that senior Magus, raised the long spear and punctured his body from the sideways. The senior Magus's body was easily penetrated by the sharp spear, just like a piece of tofu. He gave a scream and stumbled backwards. A golden flame burst out from his whole body, the raging fire even lightened up the sky. Ji Hao swung the spear again across the air and chopped the senior Magus head off. The body of the senior Magus had quickly burnt into ash, after which only a human head-sized sphere of senior Magus blood was left floating in the air. Ji Hao thrust an arm out and grabbed the blood sphere in his palm. The blood soon merged into his palm and disappeared. For example, when Ji Shu had challenged my Abba for the position of the leader, if I was my Abba, I would have killed Ji Shu's whole family long ago, then that crazy woman wouldn't get even the chance to harm us over and over again, sneered Ji Hao in a low voice while waving the long spear, causing large pieces of fire sparks to fly towards Blackwater Jiao. While speaking, Ji Hao's body disappeared again, leaving several afterimages behind him, and then showed up behind another Blackwater Serpent Clan senior Magus, after which he sliced his head suddenly off. Blackwater Jiao shouted out hoarsely in anger. He pulled out an odd-shaped machete from nowhere, barely held off the attacks launched by Ji Hao and Ape altogether. At the same time, he yelled at the two remaining Blackwater Serpent Clan senior Magi, "You together! Kill this little bastard first." The two Blackwater Serpent Clan senior Magi drew quickly together, and slightly padded around their waists. Two horned snakes, coiled around their waists, darted out and quickly expanded their bodies into hundreds of feet length, opened their jaws widely and flew towards Ji Hao, which seemed as if they would swallow him whole. Ji Hao didn't even throw a glance at the two serpents, stood still and let them have a bite on his body with their highly poisonous, sharp teeth. A beam of clear and bright light flashed across Ji Hao's body. Attacks of the two horned serpents were firmly blocked by the armor made by Pa. Ji Hao then raised the spear high and pierced both the two gigantic heads of the two serpents. The two serpents howled and struggled in great pain. Wisps of flame started spurting out from their scales and their dark scales quickly burnt glowing red. Another example. Today, you gathered tens of clans warriors and ambushed here, to get me besieged. If my Abba had received this message and had come over, he wouldn't do this for clan's sake. Apart from the benefits for our clan, he must be worried about the Fire Crow clan's reputation, and how the other clans in the southern wasteland would see us, so he would never slaughter all these people. Ji Hao looked at Blackwater Jiao with a mocking smile on his face, then said calmly, "Is this what you all thought? Keep me here and draw my Abba out? With warriors from this many clans all gathered here, my Abba definitely wouldn't fight against these many southern wasteland clans. Then you would get the chance to push my Abba into a corner and make all those senior magi rush up together, and catch him alive. Blackwater Jiao didn't respond. He was trying everything in his to hold off those continuously coming attacks launched by Ji Hao and Ape. Their plan was exactly like how Ji Hao had just said, to gather tens of clans warriors here, and frighten Ji Xia with all these men's lives. Ji Xia was a very nice and generous man, who would always consider the clan's benefit first while facing any kind of problems. Ji Xia would never start to kill these many clans, or the Fire Crow clan would instantly make incalculable more enemies. Additionally, the clan's reputation would become more than bad. Ji Xia, a senior magus who was bounded by the reputation of his clan and Ji Hao's safety, if he had come, he would be unable to walk ever out again. Senior magi from tens of clans had been waiting here, added with all of those well-prepared dark magic, such as the soul-calling magic. Even 10 more Ji Xias would undoubtedly been captured. But I am not my Abba, laughed Ji Hao scornfully and said, to me, you're all enemies, you should all just die. I'll kill all these stupid people. As for their clans, what's the big deal if they all become enemies of the Fire Crow clan? It's nothing but to waste more time and wipe them all out. Speaking of the clan's benefit, would the death of these people be harmful to our Fire clan? Well, since they've gathered here and ambushed me, then they've all become our enemies already, haven't they? Ji Xiao smiled and said while he swung the spear backwards and punctured the body of another Blackwater Serpent clan's senior magus. This senior magus could have dodged Ji Hao's attack. After all, they had huge differences in power level. At first, because Ji Hao and his friends had suddenly launched attacks, these senior magi didn't have enough time to react. After they had clearly realized what had happened and calmed their minds down, it wouldn't be as easy to kill them like that. Nevertheless, right before the senior magi tried to dodge Ji Hao's spear, a fist-thick branch suddenly thrust out from the ground and tightly banded him up so that he couldn't even move his finger. The senior magus then watched Ji Hao's spear come piercing towards his face. No matter how hard he struggled, or how loudly he roared, he could only watch that spear stuck into his chest while spurting a great flame. He felt a great heat gushing into his body, then lost consciousness and died. Ji Hao grabbed the sphere of the senior magus blood that had been left floating in the air, absorbed it into his own body within the span of a few breaths, then said calmly, enemies should all die. Not only everyone here, but also their clansmen, those women and kids, either they should die or become our slaves. Tens of dark green tree roosts thrust out from the ground, tied Blackwater Jiao and the last Blackwater Serpent clan's senior magus. Blackwater Jiao was a very powerful senior magus, who grabbed the roots and teared it off, then rolled aside and dodged the Ji Hao's deadly attack. But the other senior magus' heart was penetrated by the spear along with his shrilly screams. I, Ji Hao, have the reputation of seeking revenge for the smallest grievances. I will never wait too long for things like revenge. Ji Hao narrowed his eyes, grinned and said, you people had predicted my behavior based on my Abba's personality, how stupid you all are to have such a cute idea. Blackwater Jiao let out a growl and struggled back up from the ground. However, once he stood up, an arrow made of ghost-face spider legs silently showed up behind him, then swished through his shoulder. The arrow was dipped in a highly poisonous liquid, the poison quickly spread inside his body. Blackwater Jiao's face instantly darkened. You cannot kill these many people, growled Blackwater Jiao hoarsely, the number of senior magi on our side is 10 times greater than that of yours. By that time, the Allied forces had started to flee towards all directions. The fastest troops had already run 20 miles far. Ji Hao sneered, then let out a sharp whistle. Surrounding the fastest troops, a dense, gray fog silently appeared. Within the fog, countless looming beast silhouettes quickly emerged, which were shining with all kinds of weird and mysterious lights. Over 10,000 warriors suddenly exploded into a huge cloud of blood mist and were swallowed by the dense fog in the blink of an eye, not leaving even a single hair. Haven't you understand yet? I told you that I'm different from my Abba, especially how we deal with things. for example, I respect the rules of our ancestors very much, however, when my life is being threatened, I might, occasionally, break those rules. Ji Hao laughed coldly. Loud caws suddenly came from the air above Ji Hao. Thousands of gigantic fire crows, with their bodies wrapped in raging fire, abruptly showed up over the jungle, diving down from the sky. Chapter 71, Suppress. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 71. Suppress. You're a lunatic. You're such a heartless person. Blackwater Jiao gazed at the hundreds of gigantic fire crows which were diving down from the sky and yelled. His entire body had nearly been frozen and could hardly move. After being stunned for a moment, he had to spend quite an effort to squeeze these words out of his frozen throat, which felt as if they were as hard as pieces of stone. The thousands of fire crows which had their nests on those towering, ancient mulberry trees on the gold-black mountain, were the most solid power that the Fire Crow clan had been relying on. Without them, the Fire Crow clan would never have the ability to rule that piece of land all by themselves. These Fire Crows were direct descendants of the ancient Gold Fire Crows. Although through thousands of years, their bloodlines had become very thin and not as pure as the ancient Gold Fire Crows, they had still inherited a strand of the ancient Gold Fire Crow's magical power. Every mature Fire Crow was as powerful as a senior Magus, however, relying on the sliver of ancient Gold Fire Crow's magic power, which they contained in their blood, they could easily fight against 5 to 8 human senior Magi simultaneously. Furthermore, most of the human senior Magi couldn't fly with their own powers, but these Fire Crows were able to fly at lightning speed. When they fought, they were incredibly powerful. When they wanted to leave, they could rise high into the air and disappear within a single moment, without leaving a single trace. Usually, even if tens of ordinary senior Magi would combine their powers together, there still would be no guarantee to kill a single Fire Crow. Blackwater Serpent Clan, the archenemy of the Fire Crow clan, had always been suppressed by the Fire Crow clan, and could never win, which was because of the existence of these Fire Crows. The Horned Serpents, which were the special battle beasts of the Blackwater Serpent clan, were gigantic and powerful as well. A mature Horned Serpent was also as powerful as a senior Magus, and had its advantages when fighting against a human senior Magus. However, senior-level Horned Serpents could not fly, therefore, while facing the Fire Crows, who dominated the air, Horned Serpents would lose their advantages. With such great power, these Fire Crows had been guarding the Gold-Black Mountain's holy land for thousands of years, never going thousands of miles away from the Gold-Black Mountain. However, the Fire Leopard clan's village was nearly 20,000 miles away from the Gold-Black Mountain. Even Blackwater Jiao and Jiangyao hadn't thought that these horrible gigantic crows would show up here when they had been planning all this. At most, they had planned that the old guy, Ji Zhuo, probably would show up by himself and fight against the allied forces. They hadn't even imagined that hundreds of gigantic Fire Crows would show up in this battle. Crazy. Maybe. Ji Hao let out a whistle. Mr. Crow swooshed over and carried him on the back, after which it had risen back into the air. Then why don't I be crazier? All of the people here, not a single one of you can leave today, shouted Ji Hao. The 20-foot-long spear in his hands released beams of eye-piercing fiery light out towards the allied troops, which had madly been fleeing everywhere on the ground. The small 3-legged gold crow had been flying around the spear and cawing happily. After every beam of fist-thick fiery light had hit the ground, it quickly spread towards the surrounding, forming a tall and roaring fiery wall. The tall fiery walls swept the area for hundreds of miles in radius within the blink of an eye, along with a great heat. Large groups of allied clans' warriors were swallowed by the flame. They were crying and screaming. Novice Magi had been burnt into ashes within moments. Junior Magi had been struggling with all of their powers against the flames, however, they all were burnt into black cokes after the span of 3 to 5 breaths. Only senior Magi could bear the raging flame from the long spear with their tough bodies, and leaped into the air, launching attacks towards those diving Fire Crows. Fire Crows let out thunderous caws. With hundreds of Fire Crows gathered together, their cawing sound was as powerful as a tsunami, even the ground was slightly shaken by their caws. They were rapidly flapping their wings, throwing countless ablaze feathers along with large pieces of flames towards the ground. Every single feather accurately punctured the body of the allied clan's warriors. All those warriors whose bodies were punctured by the feathers were howling in pain, and their entire bodies were set ablaze. The senior magi amongst the allied forces' warriors were trying their best to leap into the air and attack those fire crows. They could jump around 700 to 800 feet high in the air, however, they were far less agile and mobile in the air than the fire crows. They leaped straight up, waved their weapons and hacked towards the fire crows, but the fire crows spun their bodies smoothly while they were proudly cawing, easily dodging these life-risking attacks launched by those senior magi. "Kill them all," growled Ji Hao, "take their heads and souls back to our ancestors." Fire crows were cawing excitedly, dived till they were less than 1,000 feet above the ground and opened their beaks, after which they spew raging golden-colored fires out. The flame that was being spewed out at each shot by the spear held in Ji Hao's hand could only cover an area with a circumference of a mile. However, when the fire crows spew out flames, it would rise to cover even the sky after hitting the ground. Each of the flames shot out by the fire crows covered the ground around for miles. Large groups of warriors from the allied clans were burnt into ashes in the flame, especially warriors of the Ghost Clan and the Demon Clan. The flame of the gold fire crows contained a special, pure positive power, which could break all kinds of evil power and could easily and naturally suppress the dark powers of the warriors from the Ghost Clan and the Demon Clan. After only the first flight of the fire crow across the sky, nearly all warriors from the Ghost Clan and the Demon Clan on the ground were killed. Only tens or so senior magi were left alive, screaming and shouting in pain, with their bodies wrapped by flames. They were running into the sea of flames and trying to flee. However, the raging flames had shrouded the entire area. No matter where they ran to, there was fire in front of them. Black smoke had wrapped around their bodies, and the lava melted by rocks and soil flowed everywhere on the ground. Gigantic fire crows were madly flapping their wings and caused a boiling hot gust of gale to be started. The gale rolled the lava up into 1,000-foot-high waves. The waves of lava flushed through the ground, everything that was touched by the lava had become a part of that horrible fire. Even the two other 10,000-year-old tree men, called out by Ji Hao's friend, Treeman, had stepped back as quickly as they could in fear, leaving the fire ground that had destroyed everything at their highest speed. When hundreds of fire crows went rampaging all together, any creature in this jungle that was capable of any thought wouldn't dare to challenge these big birds in rage. In the air, clan leaders sitting on all kinds of large birds, were crying and shouting in both fear and sadness. A scrawny elderly man held an ancestor's banner and screamed hoarsely towards Ji Hao, "O Lord of the Fire Crow clan! Pity our warriors. Please show some mercy. They have lost the power to resist, they can't fight against your fury, please forgive them." Mr. Crow let a sharp caw out and flew towards the old man. Ji Hao raised the long spear and thrust it through the old man's chest. After Ji Hao grabbed the senior Magus blood from the old man, he raised the spear high into the air, growled out like a ferocious ghost, "You set a ambush here and besieged our Fire Crow clan's warriors, why didn't you thought about my forgiveness back then? You made a mistake, then you should bear the consequences." Ji Hao sneered with his teeth gnashing, "Anyone that wants my forgiveness should drop their weapons and kneel on the ground." Tens of senior magi who had been leaping into the air and were trying to attack those fire crows were hit by fire crow's flame. Their bodies wrapped in four, dropped down, and rolled on the ground while howling in pain. The allied troops had already collapsed in disorder. Those warriors were looking at those fire crows in despair, which were hovering in the sky. It was not known who was the first to drop down and kneel, but soon large groups of warriors had dropped their weapons down and were kneeling hard down on the ground. "Kneel! Kneel!" Ape, who had been standing on one of the stone giant's shoulder, was proudly yelling at the surrounding warriors, "Kneel down! Don't you even think about running away. All of you! Kneel! Ape was counting his fingers and murmuring, capture one senior Magus, I can get 10 vats of booze that I have one here, 2. 1 for 10, 2 for 20, 3. How many for 3? Tens of fire crows were hovering above Blackwater Jiao. Blackwater Jiao roared towards the sky despairingly, then dropped the machete and his knees thudded against the ground. Chapter 72, Straw Dog. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 72. Straw Dog. Oi, oi. You little bastard, am I still your uncle? Qi Ying darted up to Ji Hao and knocked on his head annoyingly. Ayaya, you're my dear uncle indeed. But you wouldn't be able to help in this anyway, so I didn't tell you the plan, said Ji Hao smilingly, then spew the 3 black thorns of life and death out from his own mouth, coiled his hair on his head and stuck the 3 thorns into his hair. Qi Ying opened his mouth stunned, like a fish without water, seemingly shocked by Ji Hao's words and remained silent for quite a while. The long spear Ji Hao had used just now was stuck in the ground, and the small, 3-legged gold crow was hovering around the spear, while letting out soft caws from time to time. Although no one was activating the power contained in the spear at the moment, it still continued to emit a great heat, which made it unbearable for novice magi to stand at a distance of less than 100 feet from the spear. Isn't this the spirit magic treasure of Elder Jizhua? Qi Ying jumped suddenly up when he recognized this spear. This was Jizhua's spirit magic treasure, at the same time it was also the inherited magic treasure of his branch clan. According to the legend, this spear was forged by one of Jizhua's ancestor, a peak Magus king. The spear's history spanned over 10,000 of years and had been passed down through the generations. Within these 10,000 years, Magus kings, and other powerful senior magi had nourished this spear with their own blood. By now, the spear was capable of hearing the owner's mind and possessed tremendous power. Even Ji Hao, who had used it with the power of a junior Magus, had been able to easily puncture a senior magi's body with it. As for the 3 thorns of life and death, Qi Ying could recognize them even if he had been blinded. This was Qing Fu's, his blood sister's, spirit magic treasure, one of the inherited magic treasures of the Qin Yi clan. There were 9 of them in total. The 3 cyan thorns and the 3 white thorns were capable of saving lives, while the 3 black thorns were powerful weapons that could kill a man in the blink of an eye. Ji Hao had just seriously wounded Jiang Yao and Blackwater Jiao with these 3 black thorns. It was obvious that Qin Fu had given the power to control these thorns to Ji Hao. Which meant, both Jizhua and Qin Fu knew about Ji Hao's plan, and only Qi Ying had been kept in the dark for this time. Qi Ying hung the longbow on his shoulder and opened his arms, confused and helplessly circled around Ji Hao while complaining, Oi, oi, why did all of you do this to me? Who do you think I am? How, I am your dearest uncle. How could you not even tell me a word about this? Yelled Qi Ying out dissatisfied, where is our family affection? How, I'm hurt so bad. Ji Hao turned back, narrowed his eyes, grinned to Qi Ying, and said, family affection. Well, we have so many prisoners here, uncle, you can just pick those young, strong ones, and select 30,000 for your clan. I don't think the Qin Yi clan have enough slaves, which is why I'll give you 30,000 strong slaves. How's that for our family affection? Whoa! Qi Ying let a shout out and suddenly leapt into the air, and flipped in the air for a couple of times. He laughed so hard that even his eyelashes had fallen down. Yeah. This is the good Hao that I know. Wow, 30,000 slaves. This time, our Qin Yi clan is going to make a fortune. Qi Ying went cheerfully away, took his clansmen and began to select his slaves immediately. The allied troops that had besieged the Fire Leopard clan's village this time, had gathered the elite warriors from tens of clans. All of these warriors were tall and strong. After taking them back to the clan and taking control of their lives with a secret magic, they would all become slaves of the best quality. With these 30,000 slaves, the Qin Yi clan could open up at least 3 extra hunting grounds, and 7 to 8 mines. They might raise even tens of times more animals. The clan's resources would start to grow double, or even triple, the clan's food storage would be in abundance, newborn kids would grow more healthy and strong. This was a virtuous cycle. With this opportunity, the Qin clan could probably even lay their base of becoming a large clan from a small clan. Before, when the Qin clan would fight together with the Fire Crow clan, even if there were enemies caught during the fight, the Fire Crow clan and other dependency clans would take the majority of them. The Qin clan would occasionally get a few hundreds of slaves, which could already be considered extremely lucky. But this time, Ji Hao had given the Qin clan 30,000 strong slaves with only one word. Qin was so excited that even his feet started staggering while walking, as if he was badly drunk. In the jungle, which was shrouded by waves of hot air, large groups of warriors had dropped their weapons and were kneeling down on the ground. All of their faces were deadly pale, hardly looking like humans. Hundreds of fire crows were hovering in the sky, flying across the air near the ground from time to time, and brought up air streams with great heat, completely destroying the last little bit of fighting courage in these warriors' heart. Hundreds of senior magi from tens of clans, along with tens of elders and magus priests who had led the troops, hunkered down aside. All of them had the same deadly pale face that were not even human-like. They had been deluded by Jiang Yao, attracted by the rewards that Jiang Yao had promised them, used all of the elite forces of their clans and set a trap here, which were designed for Ji Xia and his son. However, they couldn't even imagine that Ji Hao could counterplot, and had directed this great show. Tens of big, middle, and small-scale clans within thousands of miles around had their elite warriors gathered here. At the moment, only groups of old and weak people, women and children were left in their villages. In the southern wasteland jungle, a clan that had lost all of their elite warriors could hardly survive even for half a month. Everyone was worried, and were cursing the damn, crazy woman, Jiang Yao. At the same time, some of them had started throwing glances at Ji Hao from time to time, thinking about if there were any means to save themselves and their clans from this dangerous situation. Not very far from these senior magi and magus priests, were tens of fire leopard clans magus priests and elders busy with something. Tens of newly captured beasts' throats were cut open, their blood was mixed with the powder ground by gold, jade and other mineral stones and made into sticky, blood-red liquid that was emitting a strong sense of magical power. Fire leopard clan's magus priests and elders were excitedly painting on the ground with this blood-red liquid. Blood-red spell symbols were painted down on the flat ground one after another. All of these spell symbols were continuously releasing strong power, that made people feel hard to even breathe. In the middle of these spell symbols, an altar had been built by tens of huge beasts' bones. Around the altar was a hundreds of feet long gold fire crow totem that had been painted with blood. Blackwater Jiao, who had been badly injured and lied on the ground, fixed his eyes on these elders and magus priests who were busy around the altar. The Blackwater Serpent clan and the Fire Crow clan were archenemies. They had been fighting against each other for hundreds of years, and therefore, they were all very familiar with powers and sorceries of each other. When Blackwater Jiao saw that those elders and magus priests were about to finish with the totem and the altar, his face suddenly went as pale as a piece of paper. Abruptly, Blackwater Jiao screamed out in hoarse voice, "Ancestral soul offering ceremony. You are going to offer us to your Fire Crow clan's ancestors' souls as oblations." Along with Blackwater Jiao's voice, all of those captured senior magi and magus priests screamed out aloud simultaneously. They stood up in fear and panic, desperately yelling and cursing towards Ji Hao. However, after they had let only a few words out, a faint cyan light flashed through the 3 black thorns of life and death that was stuck in Ji Hao's hair. After that all those senior magi and magus priests had fallen back on the ground. "You're right. All of you are oblations." Ji Hao looked at Blackwater Jiao, spread his hands and said helplessly, "Or, how do you think I made Mr. Crow convinced that many of his friends to come and help me?" All of the fire crows hovering in the air cawed towards the sky together, and the 3-legged, gold fire crow totem painted on the ground suddenly blazed, starting a raging fire. Translator note. Straw dogs were often used ceremonial object in ancient China, therefore, the chapter title is referring those poor warriors who had been offered to the gold fire crow during the ceremony. Chapter 73, Offerings. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 73. Offerings. 9 of the most gigantic fire crows stood around the altar in a circle. All 9 of them raised their wings and held their heads high, while gazing at the blazing sun in the sky. It was midday, the lava-like scorching hot sunshine spread down, making it look as if wings of the fire crows were covered with gold, a layer of golden, water-like light was rippling on their bodies. If one would look carefully, deep in the pupils of each fire crow that stood around the altar, a small round spell symbol could be seen flashing. This spell symbol was gold and round, circled by a layer of fiery light, just like the sun in the sky, giving an ancient and holy vibe that was beyond description. Other gigantic fire crows were silently floating in the air. All of them were staring at the altar, which seemed unspeakably mysterious and solemn. These gigantic fire crows even held their breaths, and their bodies were slightly trembling, their feathers which were as hard as iron were slightly clashing against each other and making silvering noises. Ha ha! Ha ha! Ha 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 ha, laughed Blackwater Jiao madly, and said, "Never did I think that I would be to witness this ancient secret special ancestors' blood offering ceremony of your fire crow clan with my own eyes. Gee how, you got some balls, you little bastard, you really got some balls. Your fire crow clan didn't even use this 9 suns above the sky blood offering ceremony during your centurial ancestral worship ceremony. How dare you use it like this? You little bastard." Ji Hao was fiddling with the 3 black thorns of life and death, which were as dark as ink, while looking at Blackwater Jiao, who had nearly gone mad, with a faint smile on his face and said, "The secret blood offering, the 9 suns above the sky, was not performed by my grandpas during the centurial ancestral worship ceremony, because they didn't have qualified offerings at that moment. After all, in the Holy Land's ancestral temple we worship all our ancestors' souls, most of which were the souls of real 3-legged gold fire crows that had existed since the beginning of the time, that they had seen and been through so much, which is why they wouldn't even throw a glance at ordinary offerings." Ji Hao stuck the 3 black thorns back into his hair, rubbed his hands and continued. He shrugged, and said with a smile, "If we has used the 9 suns above the sky secret blood offering during the ceremony rashly, and had awakened the souls of the ancient gold-free crows, but wouldn't have qualified oblations to offer them, then we would have to apologize to them by offering our own blood and souls to them. Those grandpas of mine are all strong and energetic, they're not prepared to die yet." Qing Ying came over with a few tall and strong Fire Crow clan's warriors, grabbed Blackwater Jiao's legs and arms and put him in the center of the altar. Blackwater Jiao screamed hoarsely while struggling with all of his remaining strength. However, all of his Magus acupoints were pierced by Ji Hao with the 3 black thorns of life and death, which contained the deadly poison that it had gathered by being used by the Qing Yi clan's Magus priests through countless years. The poison had taken control of Blackwater Jiao's body, and had deprived his power of resistance. "Ji Hao, you little bastard!" Blackwater Jiao yelled, "How dare you! There are 150.8 senior magi and 70.9 Magus priests and elders from 30.2 clans, don't you dare to offer us all to your ancestors." "Why not?" laughed Ji Hao, relaxed, and said, 150.8 senior magi and 70.9 Magus priests and elders, even the souls of the ancient gold fire crows wouldn't be too picky for that. This time, our ancestors must bless me with gifts." Not only Blackwater Jiao, but also all those senior magi from the other clans, their Magus priests and elders had started screaming madly. They were also being controlled by the black thorn's poison, and were unable to move even a finger, only their tongue senses were acting normal. "Ji Hao, please, we know that we made a mistake, we're all willing to take the punishment, and we're willing to follow the Fire Crow clan. Lord Ji Hao, we were wrong, we were wrong. My clan is willing to follow you and be one of your dependency clan. God. I don't want to die, I don't want to die." Ji Hao, Good Lord Ji Hao, please. Let me live, let me live. It's all because of Jiang Yao, that bitch. It's all her fault. We never wanted to offend the Fire Crow clan. These people, who had high status in their own clans, were all now even crying their heart out and begging Ji Hao to spare their souls. If Ji Hao was only going to kill them, they wouldn't be so afraid, some of them were even willing to die. In the southern wasteland, dying in battle for the clan's benefit was the greatest honor, and their souls would come back to the ancestral temples of their clans, join their ancestors' souls, and accept offerings of their clansmen. However, Ji Hao was not only going to kill them, he would also offer them to the Fire Crow clan's ancestors as oblations. Their souls would never be able to go back to their clan's holy land after that. Instead, they would be swallowed and absorbed by the Gold Fire Crow souls, becoming a part of them. The Gold Fire Crow souls, worshipped by the Fire Crow clan, would grow powerful because of their sacrifices, but in return they would vanish forever from this world. Therefore, they were badly frightened, they were crying in fear, faces covered in tear, some of them had even peed in their pants, dropped their dignities and continuously begged Ji Hao to not do so. Hurry, the blazing sun is high in the sky, this is the perfect moment for the offering ceremony, said Ji Hao with a cold voice. Uncle, quick, kill these clan's leaders, then you can take those 30,000 warriors without any hidden trouble. Qi Ying moved more quickly. He threw those senior magi, magus priests and elders whose faces all were covered in tears and snots, onto the altar, piled up like firewood. The 9 gigantic fire crows that were standing around the altar let out slight cause of satisfaction. Even they had never seen this 9 suns above the sky secret blood offering ceremony with their own eyes, even though it was passed down through their own bloodlines. The oldest one amongst these 9 fire crows was nearly 1,000 years old. However, within 1,000 years, the Fire Crow clan had never performed this 9 suns above the sky secret blood offering ceremony. A very long time ago, when there were still Magus kings, even divine magi in the Fire Crow clan, the clan would prepare enough offerings and perform a ceremony like this every century. That was the peak period of the Fire Crow clan's growth. The clan's power had been even greater than powerful clans like the Baifong clan and Rosefinch clan. Even these Fire Crows were charmed by the glory back then. This time, Ji Hao had prepared over 200 senior-level powerful magi and magus priests as offering, added with more junior magi and novice magi warriors as backup. Only if there was a need, they would be thrown onto the altar as offerings anytime. This blood offering ceremony must be succeeded. The 9 gigantic fire crows were all very excited, even their bodies were slightly shaking. These fire crows took glances at Ji Hao with praise in their eyes. They had traveled so fast to help and fight with Ji Hao, only this 9 suns above the sky secret blood offering ceremony was worth the journey. Soon, all senior magi, magus priests and elders from different clans were thrown onto the altar, and thousands of elite junior magi were dragged beside the altar, standing on the large totem painted on the ground. A great, raging fire suddenly rose from the 9 gigantic fire crows' bodies, and an extremely sharp, resonant caw came from the altar, which reached the sky. Ji Hao. Don't you want to know the truth about the attack that your Abba and Amma had suffered back in the Gold Black Mountain, in your own ancestral temple 10 years ago? Blackwater Jiao abruptly screamed out hoarsely, inside your holy land in the Gold Black Mountain, their elders and our. Ji Hao raised the long spear high and punctured Blackwater Jiao's throat. Blackwater Jiao stared at Ji Hao stunned, the gradually dimmed pupils of his were filled with shock and confusion. It's not for you to say. Both Abba and Amma had already known that someone in the Holy Land had colluded with your assassins team. But Abba didn't want to dig. And I already know who the person was. Why do I need you to tell me about that? Ji Hao stared at Blackwater Jiao coldly, while twisting his wrist. Suddenly, blood gushed out of Blackwater Jiao's wound like springs. BVEC from the sky very far away, a beam of fiery light was darting over. How? Ji Xia's growl came afar. Offering, start. Ji Hao raised his right arm and waved his fist hard in the air. The 9 gigantic fire crow caught out simultaneously. At the same time, a translucent, 3-legged gold fire crow slowly emerged above the altar, and all of the offerings on the altar were shrouded by a great, golden, translucent flame. The golden fire rose high into the air, dyed the jungle in the circumference of hundreds of miles into a magnificent golden color. Chapter 74, Bloodline. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 74. Bloodline. Abba, you're late. Ji Hao looked at that beam of fiery light, which was darting across the air, and let out a simple and honest smile. O souls of our great ancestors, please take these humble offerings from the Fire Crow's clansmen. Ji Hao raised his arms high and started mumbling the offering ceremony spell that was orally taught and passed down through generations of Fire Crow clan's Magus priests. Their skins, their bones, their blood, their flesh, their souls and their spirits, all of them, will now be yours. Behind Ji Hao's body, a large piece of fire was blazing. Within the fire, a looming fire crow was flying and dancing, silently cawing towards the sky. Above the altar, within the dense golden fiery light, the translucent 3-legged gold fire crow slowly and slightly opened its slender eyes. Countless extremely thin, golden beams of lights darted out of its narrowed eyes. The gold fire crow looked down at the pile of clan's leaders on the altar, suddenly widened its eyes, and let out an extremely sonorous caw that was full of delight. 9 fire crows that were standing around the altar also let loud and clear caws out. As one fell another rose. They waved their wings and started dancing slowly around the altar, with solemn and respectful expressions. These gigantic fire crows danced slowly and gracefully, like imperial nobles in the most sacred ceremony. Every single move of theirs seemed indescribably mysterious. At the same time when the fire crows were dancing, the fire crow afar which was being ridden by Ji Xia cawed suddenly out and stopped flying. It stretched its wings in the air, eyes spurted out fiery lights, while solemnly staring towards the altar's direction. The fiery light around its body transformed into a transparent sphere of light, tightly wrapping Ji Xia inside. The 9 suns above the air blood. Offering ceremony was the most sacred offering ceremony that had been passed down through these fire crows' bloodlines. They wouldn't allow anyone to interrupt this holy ceremony, not even Ji Xia had that kind of power. Ji Hao continued reading the spell. Invisible power started rotating and gathering from the surrounding air. Shrouded by this invisible power, the low sound of spell incantation gradually grew loud and sonorous. Slowly, the spell incanting sound rose high into the air and came back down from beyond the clouds. Muffled thunder sounds suddenly came from the sky. Pieces of clouds were shattered by the invisible sound waves, bearing the azure sky. A floating hill which was miles in radius slowly drifted across the air above Ji Hao along with the wind. The invisible, mysterious power drawn out by the spell incanting sound slightly hit against this hill and shattered it into ashes quietly. Afterwards the large cloud of ash was slowly dissipated into the air by the wind. The offerings on and around the altar silently blazed, both their flesh and their souls were burning fast. A dense smell of blood could be sensed along with a stream of hot air which contained enormous power, which was rotating and hovering in the air. The gold fire crow above the altar slowly opened its beak and breathed this magical hot air stream inside its body. The gold fire crow's translucent body gradually became thick and real. It seemed as if it had gained a real body made of flesh and blood instead of having the form of a soul. A trace of terrifyingly strong power was emitting from the gold fire crow's body. Stone, Treeman, Ape, Hang Luo and Ji Hao's other friends, who had been standing on a mountainside very far away, were hit by this slight trace of power, making all fall hard on the ground and roll over. Afterwards they seemed unable to get back up no matter how hard they tried. Even the 2 10,000 year-old tree men let out roars in fear, pulled their legs out of the ground and fled away at their highest speed. These 2 10,000 year-old tree men were as powerful as peak-level senior magi, but they couldn't even stand a trace of power that had been emitted from the gold fire crow's soul. Ji Hao couldn't begin to imagine how powerful this gold fire crow really was. Maybe it was as powerful as the legendary Magus kings, or even more. Ednel.co This was a legendary ancient powerful creature, even if it had fallen and become a wisp of spirit that was being worshipped by the Fire Crow's clansmen in their holy land, it still could burst enough power, once it would get the chance, to shock the whole world. The nearly 1,000 feet tall gold fire crow stood still on the altar, slowly raised its wings and released countless extremely thin beams of light, which then condensed into 9 huge golden spell symbols in the air. Those golden spell symbols then slowly rose into the air. In the sky, over 10,000 feet high from the ground, those golden spell symbols flashed across the air and disappeared. Ji Hao clearly saw that those golden spell symbols were flying towards the sun. In the next moment, the sun burst out an eye-piercing light, along with which a great heat descended from the sky. The jungle was suddenly lit up, becoming incomparably bright. Mountains, trees, and the earth had all become nearly transparent when showered in this snow-white light. Everything had become as pure as colored glaze under this light. Not a single thing in this world could block this kind of light. This pure primitive light and heat, descended from the air, enveloped the altar that had a radius of 1,000 feet, which had been set up by Ji Hao and Fire Leopard clan Magus priests inside. Wisps of hot air that contained great powers started drawing near Ji Hao's body and gushing inside. After he had activated his bloodline power, Ji Hao possessed tens of meridians that were blazing inside his body. However, while his body was absorbing this magical power coming along with the hot air, the more complex interleaving meridians were lit up inside his body. Faint, fiery lights started to slowly being emitted from these meridians. Ji Hao understood, this was a gift from the 9 suns above the air secret blood offering ceremony. The gold fire crow had drawn a magical power, which had gotten into Ji Hao's body and slowly activated the power sources contained in his body, which had been lost by the Fire Crow clansmen through the passing of the past thousands of years. Ji Hao felt that his eyes were boiling hot, and his body was scorching. The sphere of flame inside his chest became more powerful and compact. A great hot power silently condensed into several faint, transparent feather-like and fine spell symbols, and were being inlaid on Ji Hao's skin one after another. Ji Hao didn't even notice that he had got his 4th special ability, the Gold Fire Armor. A special ability that had only existed in the Fire Crow clan's legends. The Gold Fire Armor was a defensive magical special ability. These spell symbols that were condensed by the huge power contained in the hot air, had a formidable defensive power. Additionally, they could largely improve the abilities of flying and running, which meant that these spell symbols could improve Ji Hao's speed to at least double the amount once he triggered his fiery wings. Mr. Crow, who had been standing on Ji Hao's shoulder, let a happy caw out while raising his wings high. Countless thin beams of golden light shone towards Mr. Crow from all directions as well and entered into his body. Suddenly, 3 feathers on Mr. Crow's head were blazed, then slowly turned golden. After that his claws went ablaze as well and soon turned into a magnificent golden color, as if they were gilded. The thin gold fire crow's bloodline, contained in Mr. Crow's body, had largely been improved, which improved its future prospects. The 9 gigantic fire crows that were standing around the altar were even happier. They were swallowing the light coming from the air. In the meanwhile, their bodies all went ablaze. On their wings or tails, there were 1 or 2 feathers that slowly had turned into a light golden color within the fire. Similar to Mr. Crow, the gold fire crow's bloodline, contained in their bodies, had been improved. Their power didn't increase a lot immediately, however, they would certainly become a lot more powerful than other ordinary fire crows in the future. All of the fire crows nearby was lightly cawing. More or less, their bloodline had all been improved. Undoubtedly, the one who had gotten the most from this offering ceremony was the gold fire's soul that was standing on the altar. Its dim and translucent body had already become like a sculpture forged with pure gold. Its entire body was glowing in a divine golden light. The gold fire slightly nodded towards Ji Hao, then let a satisfied caw out. It transformed into a sphere of fiery light and disappeared into the air, without leaving even a single trace. A fierce gust of wind blew over. The altar, along with the ground under it, instantly turned into white ashes, which were rolled up by the wind and blown away. Chapter 75, Brothers, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 75. Brothers, while Ji Hao was performing the blood offering ceremony, Ji Xia, who had come from the Cold Stream Valley, was not the only audience that had been watching this great ceremony from afar. Brother, aren't we a little shameless? On a mountainside, very far away from the altar and the crowd, under the shades of dense branches and leaves, Di Luo was leaning against a camphor tree's branch, lazily picked a handful of tender leaves from the branch and threw it into his mouth, and started chewing. Poor pretty lady, Jiang Yao, the Magus priestess, her heart must be broken by now that she didn't get to see us launch the attack. She must be sobbing with a broken heart now. Di Sha had been standing inside the shrub wood with a serious face. The erect eye located in the middle of his forehead had turned pure black, no pupil could be seen in it. Inside the eye, a dim light was rotating slowly, like a deep whirlpool. With this eye, he clearly saw all the details during the blood offering ceremony that was being performed by Ji Hao at the moment. His left hand was covered under the wide sleeve of his cloak, while his fingers were fiddling with a palm-sized, blood-red jade plate. Pretty Magus priestess. My dearest brother, please, do not think anything else about this woman, except our business. Di Luo's right hand had carried a small whip, with a hilt that was made of pure gold. He swung his right hand backwards and whipped Di Luo slightly while speaking. I assume that you can still feel a little bit pain from this newly grown eyeball of yours. Hopefully, this will make you smarter. Remember, Di Luo, the relationship between us and that woman, Jiang Yao, can only be of pure business. You cannot let anything that might affect your decision-making into your mind, never. Di Sha then turned to Di Luo and said, the dim light rotating inside his erect eye suddenly darted out. I have been in charge of the blood fang, capturing and selling slaves in this southern wasteland, for 500 years now. Di Luo, my brother, said Di Sha seriously, whole 500 years. I remembered clearly, within this not very short time period, the slaves captured from this primitive land and sold by me, are 2,070,809,530.7 in total. However, within this 500 years, the warriors of the blood fang, our own clansmen who had the noble bloodline and those good Jia clan warriors, didn't lose even a single one, said Di Sha while proudly holding his head high, although tens of thousands of those low-life slave warriors had died, while I have been in charge, none of our own clansmen and Jia clan's warriors have fallen during this entire time period. Not a single one. Ah, that's amazing. My dearest brother, that's really amazing, said Di Luo while letting out a perfunctory grin. I was just saying that Jiang Yao was a really pretty woman, really, really pretty. She smells so different from any of those girls I know. You damn stupid thing. Di Sha knocked Di Luo's head hard with the hilt of the whip in anger, and growled in a low voice, do not touch that woman, do not even think about it. And do not get deluded by her beauty. Di Luo, the fact that I haven't lost even a single warrior that had the noble bloodline, is because I am cautious and calm enough. More importantly, I am shameless enough. Shameless, said Di Luo while he looked at Di Sha with a slight trace of shock on his face. You are saying that you're very shameless. Just as you said. Di Sha turned back and looked towards the altar's direction, which was shrouded by the great fiery light and raging flame that had even reached into the sky, and said, I promised Jiang Yao to help her and these stupid barbarians she gathered here in order to attack her enemy. But, we have been standing here and watching all the time. We have saved our forces and didn't do what we had promised her. This is indeed very shameless. Di Sha shrugged, then continued, but, what's the big deal about being shameless? We didn't rashly launch that attack, so those horrible big birds couldn't hurt our people. Not a single one of our noble clansmen, and those loyal, reliable Jia clan warriors got hurt during this fight. Di Sha then sneered, pointing his finger at the direction of the altar and said, "My brother, can you please tell me, if we did exactly as we had promised that woman, and had helped those barbarians and launched the attack stupidly, how many of our people would have died when those crazy big birds showed up?" Di Luo stayed silent for a while, then nodded and said, "Okay, be cautious, calm and shameless, I have remembered that." Di Sha threw a deep glance at Di Luo, sighed and said, "Hopefully, you truly did." Di Luo. Di Sha then swung the whip towards the bush aside, hit and broke large pieces of branches and leaves, which were tender and juicy. Faint green myron gushed out and emitted a light herbal scent, quickly spreading in the air. The erect eye of Di Sha closed slowly, then he calmly said, "Last night, I received a transfer command. It said that because of the meritorious contribution I've made for these 500 years, I will become the new leader of the Blood Moon. In 3 days I will take all of the slaves that we have gained during this time and leave from here. From that moment on, Di Luo, you will be in charge of the Blood Fawn." Di Luo took a glance at Di Sha with shock and surprise filled in his eyes, then smilingly lowered his body and saluted to his older brother, and said, "Dear Di Sha, my dearest brother, you should be without any worries. With my lead, the Blood Fawn will only become stronger and stronger." Di Sha took a deep breath, grabbed Di Luo's shoulder and said, "I hope so." Di Luo, you must keep in mind, the Blood Fawn is closely related to the fundamental interests of our family, you cannot make any mistakes, not even the slightest one, no matter what. Then he thrust his left hand out of his sleeve, patted the eye socket of Di Luo, which had been cut out by Ji Hao not long ago, and said with a low voice, "Remember, because of your actuation and boldness you almost got yourself killed in this damn jungle once. This is the first lesson that you have learned from this southern wasteland jungle, you must always keep it in mind." Loud and sonorous caws came from the altar afar. Golden red, hot waves of air could be seen spreading continuously towards the surrounding areas. The mountain that Di Sha and Di Luo had been standing on was hit hard by the hot air waves. Large pieces of jungle quickly dehydrated and withered, some fallen leaves even started burning. "Let's go. We're a bit too conspicuous by standing here." Di Sha took Di Luo's hand and quickly went away. While walking, he didn't stop emphasizing how good the Fire Crow clan was. "Di Luo, you have to remember that if you want to make a good living in this primitive land, plunder wealth and glory from this land, you have to be careful and cautious. In the meanwhile, don't forget to gather information as much as you can. For example, amongst those barbarous creatures of the Fire Crow clan, some people have weirdly great eyesight, even sometimes, from the distance of hundreds of miles away, they can discover the details that ordinary people can't," said Di Sha seriously. "Therefore, in situations like this, when these plants can't hide our bodies anymore, we have to leave as fast as we can. You must keep in mind, Di Luo, we came to this southern wasteland jungle for only wealth and glory, not anything else. To keep yourself alive, to keep those Blood Fawn warriors alive, should be the first principle that you always have to keep in mind after you have become the leader of Blood Fawn." Yeah. Di Luo kept responding. From time to time, he turned his head back and looked towards the altar's direction, eyes shining with a weird light. Di Sha then said slowly, "I really wish that I could train you more for a couple of years, then I could leave without any worries. But I don't have enough time, because I can't violate the transfer command coming from the Blood Moon. Since the family had chosen you, then I can only trust you on this." The brothers quickly left the mountain, went down from the other side of the mountain and met with hundreds of Jia clan's warriors, who had been waiting in a deep valley all this time. Then the troops quietly left the valley without disturbing anyone. Di Sha didn't notice that Di Luo had been turning his head back and looking at the fiery light afar, with frenzy, proud and deep hatred filled in all three of his eyes. Chapter 76, Truth. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 76. Truth. Large amounts of white ashes were drifting in the air. More than a half of the Fire Leopard clan's village was shrouded by these ashes. Contained within these white ashes were the bone ashes of those offerings that had been burnt by the gold fire crow's flame, and ashes of soil and rock. Every single particle of these ashes contained a wisp of the remaining hot power, which had come from the gold fire crow's soul. While people were walking through these ashes, these particles clashed against each other and burst out large pieces of fire sparks along with popping noises. The Fire Leopard clan's people were cleaning their village, dealing with the dead bodies of the enemies and their own perished clansmen. A large group of clansmen were walking through these white ashes, which made the entire village seem as if it was shrouded by a raging fire. The glowing red fiery light even shone upon the vast jungle around. Woo woo yo, a mumbling sound came from the jungle. It were Treeman and the two friends of his. The three of them walked slowly into the jungle, which had been burnt out earlier. Following behind them were a large group of small spirits of trees and flowers, who were drawn near out of themselves. Treeman and his two friends had tried very hard to shrink their bodies into the most minuscule size they were capable of. Each of them were carrying a huge booze vat with their branch-like arms. On one hand, they were gulping the booze contained in the vats happily. On the other hand, they were busy at spreading seeds of all kinds of plants towards the burnt soil, which was still hot. All three of these old trees were slightly drunk, even their feet staggered while walking, and stepped everywhere with their gigantic bodies, which made those small spirits of trees and flowers near their feet scream out in fear. Under the cliff, inside the half-collapsed meeting room of the Fire Leopard clan, Ji Xia was sitting near a bonfire with his legs crossed, while he was munching a large piece of grilled beast meat that was emitting a thick aroma. Being grilled and sizzled upon the bonfire was a horned gorilla. Bear, the mount belonging to a ghost clan's senior magus. This horned gorilla. Bear was a senior-level beast. The poor thing was found badly wounded after the fight, but those Fire Leopard clan's Magus priests did not want to spend any of their precious medicines on this beast. That's why they decided to clean and skin it, then grill it and treat their honored guests with it. How, since you have gained the approval of our ancestors' souls, makes what you just did not wrong. Ji Xia finished more than a half of the grilled beast, satisfyingly patted his own belly and said. Although Abba had never bullied those poor little clans with our Fire Crow clan's power, but since they besieged us at the first place, then there's nothing more to say about it. They all deserve to die, continued Ji Xia while a slight beam of cold light flashed across his pupils. Ji Hao was holding a booze vat, drank a few mouthful of liquor that was emitting a strong scent contained in the vat, then wiped the liquor which was dripping down along the corner of his mouth. Huh, Abba, when I saw you flew over like rocket, I thought you were going to stop me from performing the offering. Ceremony, said Ji Hao while glancing at Ji Xia. After that he knocked the vat hard against the ground, and said with a muffled voice, Abba, Amma said that sometimes you have been soft-hearted. Ji Xia wanted to remain the stateliness of a father, so he made a serious face and sniffed, said, soft-hearted. I was concerned about the overall situation and the clan's benefit. You know, you're Abba. Ah, Abba, you're so wise and brave, such a real man who has never gone soft, always seeking revenge for all kinds of invasions. Ji Hao interrupted the long speech which was about to come out from Ji Xia, and said, Jiang Yao had driven all these clans and attacked the Fire Leopard's clan, and Jiang Shui was her helper. Abba, what do you think about this? Ji Xia paused for a second, slowly put his vat down, seemingly lost deep in thought. Jiang Yao was Jiang Bo, the master magus priest of the Baifeng clan, his daughter, and Jiang Shui was the daughter of Jiang Shu, an elder of the Baifeng clan. Jiang Yao was badly injured by Ji Hao and had fled away. Unless she wanted to trigger a real war between the Fire Crow clan and the Baifeng clan, she would never tell anybody about the fact that she had driven all these clans and attacked the Fire Leopard clan. However, Ji Hao had killed Jiang Shui cruelly in the battle, which might be a bit troublesome. While Ji Xia was thinking, a caw came from the air, along with which, a gust of gale started blowing towards the ground, and a cold hoarse voice pierced into Ji Hao's ears like steel needles. This voice was incomparably hoarse and ice-cold, filled with a weird and evil power that would make people quiver. Ji Xia and Ji Hao frowned and stood simultaneously up from the ground. The vats placed aside their feet cracked altogether and liquor seeped out in streams. An elderly man, who was as tall as Ji Xia but extremely scrawny, even looked like a stick, walked inside with stiff steps, and growled out with a very cold voice in the meanwhile, Ji Xia. You have to give us, the elders of our Fire Crow clan, a reasonable explanation. Do you still remember your responsibility? You're only responsible of guarding the Cold Stream Valley and protecting the mine there. Who gave you this right and nerve to do this? Before the elderly man finished his speech, Ji Hao took a deep breath and rudely interrupted him. Ah, the elder Ji Fang, is there any problem about my Abba coming here? My Abba just ran a 9 suns above the sky, the blood offering ceremony, and our ancestors were very satisfied with that. Are you saying that my Abba was wrong? If so, did you just say that our ancestors were wrong? The elderly man stopped talking and was stunned. He was choked by Ji Hao's words and didn't know how to respond for quite a while. At that moment, another resonant caw came from the sky above. Followed by a swishing sound, the ground slightly shook. Someone had leaped down from the air and had almost shaken the half-broken Fire Leopard clan's meeting room into collapsing. Ji Zhua darted in with big steps, laughed out loud and pressed his hand on Ji Fang's shoulder, then said loudly, Ji Fang, you have always been so impatient ever since you were a little kid. You just couldn't calm down. Look, you got yourself embarrassed in front of these kids again. Ji Hao clearly saw that Ji Zhua's 5 fingers had violently pitted into Ji Fang's shoulder. He even heard the creaking sounds made by Ji Fang's shoulder bones while being pressed by Ji Zhua with a great power. Ji Fang's face was badly twisted, his originally pale face had now even turned blue. You're too impatient, Ji Fang, you probably haven't heard the message from the ancestral temple of the Holy Land yet. Our ancestors had delivered their will to all of the Magus priests, and said that they were very satisfied with the blood offering ceremony today. Our ancestors also said that Ji Hao is a good kid. What did you say? Yelled Ji Fang with a twisted face. Our ancestors said that we did no wrong. Ji Hao put his mouth near Ji Fang's face and said coldly, Abba took our clansmen here from the Cold Stream Valley, beat a bunch of stupid people who came from a bunch of stupid clans, and had exaggerated opinions of their own abilities, then offered those stupid things to our ancestors through the ceremony. Our ancestors are very satisfied, so what Abba did was all great. Ji Fang closed his mouth and never let a single word out. In the southern wasteland clans, the truth can be this simple and crude. As long as one had gained the satisfaction of their ancestors, then all that he or she had done would be right. However, normally, ordinary clansmen couldn't even come near the ancestral temple of the Holy Clan, except during the decennial and centurial worship ceremony. Only if someone used the secret, ancient ceremony like Ji Hao had did, would he or she probably wake the ancestors' souls up, and gain their favor. Ji Fang was now ragingly cursing those people who had told him to come in his head. When those people urged him to come to hear and question Ji Xia in anger, they didn't mention that Ji Hao and Ji Xia had even bribed the ancestors. Ji Zhua threw a deep glance at Ji Hao, then laughed delightedly and said, although our ancestors had delivered their will to our Magus priests, Xia, you should still go back to the Gold Black Mountain and describe every detail of this fight to those elders and Magus priests in the Holy Land. Oh, and the Master Magus Priest, Ji Kuei has already announced on behalf of our ancestors, that all those clans that had attacked the Fire Leopard clan are our enemies. How, you will be responsible for wiping them all out, continued Ji Zhua. Chapter 77, Private Property. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 77. Private Property. A black banner was fluttering in front of the entrance of a small village. On the surface of the banner, which was made from human skin and beast tendons, tens of hideous bugs had been painted with the blood of some beast. Tens of wisps of black smoke were spurting out from the banner. Each wisp of black smoke had more than tens of thousands of poisonous and multicolored bugs hidden inside it. Those bugs were flying towards Ji Hao while buzzing sharply, like ocean waves. Ji Hao had been standing still right in front of the entrance of the small village, while facing those black smokes that were roaring towards him. The armor made by Pe emitted a faint, cyan light, which completely blocked the black smoke with bugs hidden in them. Those bugs were madly trying to take a bite of Ji Hao's body, but couldn't even touch a hair on Ji Hao. More bugs were flying towards him while spewing venoms. However, all kinds of venoms were blocked by the cyan light as well. They dropped on the ground, neither could even touch Ji Hao's body. On Ji Hao's skin, a layer of extremely dim, red and feather dot-like spell symbols were flashing loomingly. Occasionally, a wisp of fire would spurt out from Ji Hao's body and burn large quantities of flying poisonous bugs, which die making a popping sound. Dead bugs were continuously dropping onto the ground. In only 7 to 8 minutes, a 2 feet thick layer of bugs' carapaces had already been piled up around Ji Hao's body. Inside the village, a few scrawny, green-skinned old Magus priests were screaming. They jerked out black daggers and stabbed hard into their own chests. The banner in front of the village entrance started to shake violently. The fresh hot blood gushed out of those old Magus priests' bodies had all been drawn and absorbed by the banner. An ear-piercing call came from the banner, along with which, a black mist was being released from the banner. From within the mist 3 gigantic, multicolored, poisonous scorpions emerged. These scorpions flew out of the banner, swung their hundreds of feet long tails that had huge poisonous hooks towards Ji Hao. Ji Hao continued to remain motionless. The cyan light emitted by the armor worn by Ji Hao, which was as light as a feather, seemed to have become a bit brighter. Followed by a thunderous bang, all 3 poisonous hooks hit hard against the armor on Ji Hao's body. In the next moment, all of the 3 poisonous hooks had been smashed into meat paste against Ji Hao's armor. Blood and venoms splashed everywhere. Those old Magus priests inside the valley fell on the ground in despair. They let out long wails and cries which were filled with hopelessness. The banner in front of the village then was shattered into a cloud of black smoke by an invisible power, and dissipated quickly in the air along with the wind. A quarter of an hour later, all of the remaining Gu clan's people walked out of the village one after another. Walking in front of the line were a few old Magus priests. They were holding the sculptures of 5 highly poisonous creatures, which were carved out of jade, then carefully put these totems of their clan near Ji Hao's feet, while trembling. All of their eyes were filled with fear. One of the allied clan which had attacked Ji Hao's troop, the Gu clan, had collapsed at that moment. 2 days ago, in front of the entrance of the Ghost clan's village, 200 of elite warriors, who had been left to guard the village, were shouting and yelling. The shortest one among these warriors was tens of feet tall. They were all madly weaving heavy axes and swords, held in their hands, towards Ji Hao. The cyan light of the armor worn by Ji Hao appeared again and was rotating around Ji Hao's body. Ji Hao stayed still. No matter how hard those Ghost clan's warriors tried, they couldn't harm Ji Hao even a little bit. On the contrary, Ji Hao pulled out a machete that he had seized from Blackwater Jiao's hands, and slightly waved it across the air, chopping the heads of tens of warriors, who were standing near him, off. A light, low growl could be heard. Suddenly, a loud howl came from out the crowd of warriors. A 30 feet tall, sturdy warrior had been violently grabbed by stone on the neck and brought up into the air while coughing blood up. This was the only senior Magus left in the Ghost clan, and also was the last bit of courage that had been left in these Ghost clan's warriors' hearts. Stone and the 3 of his friends got into the village from under the ground, and badly injured the last senior Magus of the Ghost clan. This time the Ghost clan had been crashed thoroughly. Large groups of Ghost clan's people walked out of the village, kneeled down in front of Ji Hao in fear, and were tied up by the Fire Crow clan's warriors with beast tendons ropes that had been injected with a secret magic spell. The Demon clan, Cyan Cattle clan, Buffalo clan, Tusk Tiger clan, Raging Lion clan. All those clans which had been involved in the allied troops, had been conquered by Ji Hao's ruthlessness. Almost all of the senior-level magi and magus priests had been offered to the fire crow's ancestors as oblations, and the remaining part of these people lacked the power to resist against Ji Hao and the large troops led by him, not to mention that Stone, Hang Luo, Treeman and their friends were traveling alongside with the troops. Amongst these non-human friends of Ji Hao, there were more than tens of senior-level creatures. Ji Hao swept through all those clans and hardly encountered any difficulty. Millions of people from tens of clans were captured alive, became Fire Crow clan slaves, and had been mixed together. They were randomly sent to work in hunting grounds, mines, fields and pastures of the Fire Crow clan. Ji Hao had been occupied with this for over 3 months before finally wiping all tens of clans out and capturing all of their clansmen. When the long and annoying rainy season of the southern wasteland jungle was about to come, Ji Hao had returned to the Cold Stream Valley with his troops. After 3 months of fighting and traveling, Ji Hao had grown taller and more muscular. When he rode on his mount, he seemed no different from other adults Fire Crow clan warriors at first glance. Probably, the only differences were that because of the mantra Dan with 9 secret words, Ji Hao's eyes had been especially bright. Occasionally, when he took a glance at a certain spot, 2 lightning bolts like lights would dart out of his eyes and directly hit on the spot. Even the Fire Crow warriors who were most close to him wouldn't dare to look directly into his eyes. Another thing was, along with the improvement of his power, Ji Hao's skin had become more and more white and tender, like the purest jade. A pearl-like luster was shining on his nearly silver skin. It seemed like there was a layer of liquid silver flowing under his skin. Even if he would stand amongst hundreds or thousands of warriors, people would still recognize Ji Hao first glance. None of the other warriors could steal the spotlight away from Ji Hao. From out a long distance, Qing Fu, who had been standing on the fence wall of the Cold Stream Valley, saw Ji Hao. This was the first time that Ji Hao had been seen by Qing Fu after such a long time. Qing Fu raised her right hand high and shouted towards Ji Hao with happiness. "Hao! You finally came back. Alma will cook you the most delicious grilled meat." Ji Hao laughed out aloud, then leapt into the air. A beam of fiery light appeared behind his body. He then darted out and left a long trace of fiery light and large quantities of afterimages behind him. Within the span of a few breaths, he had flown across miles and leapt onto the fence wall, held Qing Fu up and spun a few rounds. "Alma! I and Uncle have all returned. Ah, we've picked quite a few rare herbs for you during the journey, including the blood swallow that you have been talking about for years. Uncle was nearly disfigured by a wild cat for picking that for you, Qing Fu exclaimed and turned around in a flurry, looking at Qin Ying. After seeing that Qin Ying's face was perfectly fine and without any scars, she laughed out, lightly slapped on Ji Hao's face and said, "Good, good, if Qin Ying's face had really got scratched by the cat, then how would we get him a wife?" Qin Ying puffed his chest out and said proudly, "Sister, I'm not trying to attract girls with my face anymore. Now, I'm the youngest senior magi ever of the entire Qin Yi clan. Groups of girls will line up for me." While Qing Fu, Qin Ying and Ji Hao were talking and laughing, Ji Xia walked over with big steps, together with a group of people walking behind him. From a long distance, Ji Xia laughed out loud and yelled to Ji Hao, "Hao, you finally have returned. Come over. From now on, these warriors are your personal slaves. They're all your properties, do you understand that? They will rely on you for living." Ji Hao's mouth fell open stunned. Personal slaves. Ji Hao fixed his eyes on this group of warriors, after which he couldn't help but to gasp deeply. Were these people all his very own, personal slaves? Both their numbers and power levels amazed Ji Hao hugely. Chapter 78, Family Property. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 78, Family Property. The annoying rainy season had finally come. Warm, heavy rain was ceaselessly coming down from the sky, feeling like the sweat of some dirty man. It seemed that the rain, mixed with grue and sticky mist, had shrouded the entire southern wasteland inside. The cold stream within the valley had doubled in width within only half an hour. The originally crystal clear and chilly water had now turned into a khaki color, wriggling and roaring like a serpent, hitting against the stones on the shores of the stream along with a loud flushing noise. Deep in the valley, near the cliff, was a three-floor building outside which, over 100 tall and sturdy warriors were standing expressionlessly in the rain. The heavy raindrops dripped onto their bodies and crystal water drops shattered against their muscles, but these warriors didn't even blink their eyes. No matter how they had originally looked like, all of their faces had now been covered by a large blood-red tattoo, because of which no one would be able to tell how they had looked previously. The tattoos of three-legged fire crow were emitting a great heat. Even while they were standing in the rain, not a single raindrop remained on their body. All the rainwater on the shoulders and heads of these warriors had been evaporated into hot steam and had risen into the air. This kind of totem tattoo was the brand of the Fire Crow clan slaves. They were all tattooed with a special, magical dye that had been made from 90.9 gigantic fire crow's blood and mixed with the blood contained in the hearts of hundreds of different kinds of beasts in the jungle. There were also hundreds of different kinds venom added, finally making it into a dye with a special spell of the Fire Crow clan. The totem tattooed by this type of dye contained an extremely strong power. Unless these warriors had the power that would be even greater than the 90.9 Fire Crow's power combined, their souls and bodies would remain branded and ruled by these totems forever, without ever getting their freedom again, even if they would die. Ji Hao had been sitting inside the wooden house, gobbling the grilled meat and rice cake that was served by Qing Fu, while fixing his eyes on these warriors standing in the rain. Amongst these warriors, 5 of them were on the verge of becoming senior magi. They only needed 3 more months at the most, to break into the senior level and become genuine senior magi. Aside the 5 of them, there were over a whole 100 high-level junior magi warriors. Amongst them, 10 had already reached the peak junior level, had their own special bloodline meridians, inherited from their own ancestors, activated, and had started practicing on awakening their first Magus acupoints up. Ji Xia had been sitting beside Ji Hao, enraptured talking about everything that had happened during his journey back to the Gold Black Mountain 2 months ago. Led by Ji Fang, a few elders sourly criticized the violent behaviors of Ji Xia and his son, with only a few sentences. However, since the souls of the ancestors in the Holy Land's ancestral temple had delivered their own opinions to all of Fire Crow clan's Magus priests, expressing that they were all satisfied with the blood offering ceremony performed by Ji Hao, and also would continue to encourage and support things like this, therefore, all of the Fire Crow clan's Magus priests had chosen to stand on Ji Hao's side, even those Magus priests who were privately supporting Ji Shu. They had no other choice but to support Ji Hao this time. Even Ji Shu himself had bitterly expressed his admiration towards Ji Xia, and his praise and expectations towards Ji Hao. As for the death of Jiang Shui and the serious injuries of Jiang Yao, Ji Xia hadn't heard even a word about them while he was in the Gold Black Mountain. It was as if Jiang Yao wasn't the one who had gathered tens of clans into an allied force and attacked the Fire Leopard clan, that Ji Hao wasn't the one who had badly wounded Jiang Yao, and neither was Jiang Shui shot to death by Ji Hao's friend, Heng Luo with a ghost-face spider legs arrow. In the meeting, held by the Master Magus Priest, Ji Kuei, the Fire Crow clan's Master Magus Priest, had given a final conclusion about that. The allied forces were the who had attacked Fire Leopard clan and besieged Ji Hao's troop. The final conclusion was, all those clans who had joined the allied forces were played and used by the Blackwater Serpent clan, shamelessly launching a sneak attack on the most loyal dependency clan of the Fire Crow clan, the Fire Leopard clan. They had challenged the Fire Crow clan by doing this, and also had provoked all of the Fire Crow clan's ancestors' souls in the Holy Land's ancestral temple. Therefore, all those clans should be eliminated, and all of their clansmen must become the Fire Crow clan slaves, working and fighting for the Fire Crow clan from generation to generation, to atone for their crimes. The Fire Crow clan's elders, who were in charge of all kinds of clan affairs, had accurately calculated the total amount of people in these clans. Apart from those unlucky warriors who had been offered to the ancestors as oblations by Ji Hao, and the 30,000 young slaves that Ji Hao had promised Qingying, and slaves, women and kids that had been giving to the Fire Leopard clan to compensate for their losses during this fight, the Fire Crow clan would this time gain over 5 millions of high-quality slaves from these tens of clans. During all these years, the conflict between the Fire Crow clan and the Black Water Serpent clan had occurred several times every year. However, the power of these two clans were nearly even, so their warriors might die in battle, but this kind of fight rarely brought a large amount of captives. This time, the Fire Crow clan had destroyed almost all of the elite forces of these tens of clans, who had possessed great power before. Therefore, the rest of their clansmen, who were unable to resist, had all become the Fire Crow clan slaves. This was the best harvest of the Fire Crow clan within the past hundreds of years. While those elders and Magus priests of the Fire Crow clan were discussing all these, Ji Hao and his troops, who were as powerful and fast as a wildland fire, had eliminated the nearest 5 clans, and had started sending slaves, guarded by groups of Fire Crow clan warriors, to the Gold Black Mountain. At last, Ji Kuei talked on behalf of the ancestors, giving the final verdict about Ji Hao and his behavior. He said that Ji Hao had made great contributions to the Fire Crow clan, although he was young, but the contribution he made to the clan could be compared to that of the most elite warriors in the clan already. Furthermore, powerful warriors deserved better treatment, and warriors who made contributions to the clan shall receive proper rewards. Therefore, 5 powerful warriors who had almost reached the senior level, and 100 of elite and peak-level junior magi warriors had been awarded to Ji Hao as his personal slave. While talking, Ji Xia abruptly slapped his own lap, then slightly punched Ji Hao's shoulder, laughed out loud and said, "How, you kid, you're Abba, when the first time I had lead our clansmen and fought against those stinky snakes for 3 months, eliminated 5 branch clans of theirs, the clan had only given me 20 junior-level personal slaves." Ji Xia then held his head high proudly and boasted, "Qing Fu, look. This is my son, Ji Xia's son. Stronger than me." For his first time when he got rewarded by the clan, he has gained more than his Abba's, which was mine, all awards added together, which I had gained after fighting for the clan for 20 whole years. Qing Fu smilingly brought a plate of newly picked fruits, rubbed Ji Hao's head and said, "How, not every Fire Crow clansman has their personal slaves, especially this many and this powerful. In the clan, you now have equal status with great warriors like your Abba." Smiled gently, Qing Fu looked at Ji Xia and said seriously, "Hao has grown up and has his own property, we should find him a nice girl. Xia, what do you think about this? Should it be our Qin Yi clan girl or from some other clan?" Ji Xia scrubbed his own head and frowned, smacked his lips then said, "Well, talking about girls, the Qin Yi clan's girls are certainly the most beautiful. But, back then, in order to marry you, I had to give all of my slaves and more than a half of my properties to your Abba. The Qin Yi clan's girls. Their prices are hurting to the soul." Qing Fu pouted slightly and took an accusing glance at Ji Xia, silently grabbed his earlobe and twisted it slightly. Ji Hao had been choked by a mouthful of rice cake when he heard his parents, and nearly couldn't breathe. How old they thought he was. Why had they started to talk about his marriage already? Yelled Ji Hao in his head. "Abba, Alma, no rush, really, no rush. I just have received over 100 slaves, I haven't even figured out how to feed them yet. A few more years, just wait, a few more years." Ji Hao then darted out of the room while yelling, "I have to build some houses for these slaves to get them settled down. And didn't you say that they're all my personal slaves, and their offsprings are all my slaves as well? Then I have to find enough wives for them." Ji Hao disappeared in the rain, while shouting and yelling. Ji Xia and Qing Fu laughed aloud simultaneously. Quickly after that, Ji Xia's face darkened, and his expression became extremely cold. Qing Fu, we have to figure out a plan concerning Ji Shu and Jiang Yao. Even if not for ourselves, we have to think for Hao. TL note. Pay for marriage is a tradition in old China. Usually, the husband need to give a certain amount of money and sometimes other properties to the wife's family, at or before the wedding ceremony, to show that he would value this woman and to thank her family for raising her. If the fiancé couldn't afford the certain amount of money as the fiancé's family had required, then their marriage could probably be denied. This tradition have been maintained in some Chinese families till today, not as strict as the old days though. I personally can't accept it. Chapter 79, Rainy Season. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 79. Rainy season. The rainy season in the southern wasteland was a vexing season that made all kinds of predators feel extra bored. Uncountable raindrops were continuously falling from the sky, and seasoning rivers were madly flushing around the jungle, large pieces of woods were soaked in warm water, and those thick tree trunks were thickly dotted with colorful mushrooms. The only interesting thing in the rainy season. Ji Hao squatted down in front of his family's house, held a huge, wooden mug in his hands. The mug contained a virid, home-made tea water that was emitting a very refreshing herbal scent. From time to time, Ji Hao would lower his head and take a sip from the mug. The tea temporarily dispersed the moisture that had stagnated inside his body. The damn weather. Qin Ying's complaining came from afar. He had been holding a gigantic leaf upon his head, while walking lazily in the rain, passed by Ji Hao like a walking corpse, then disappeared again slowly in the heavy rain. Normally, Qin Ying would always have paid extra attention to his appearance, but now he seemed not to have cleaned himself for days. Right upon the pair of his beast-leather boots, one red and one blue, thumb-sized poisonous mushrooms were blooming. Qin Ying didn't seem to have noticed these two little, uninvited guests at all. The moist air made all of the bowstrings of the Qin Yi clan's warriors become soft and powerless. The rising mist blocked their eyesight, and completely deprived their biggest fun from them. Hunting, therefore, all of the Qin Yi clan's warriors had become lazy and bored, and had lost their energy like bears in hibernation. The heavy rain never stopped. Inside the cold stream valley, only the mining work had been carrying on. The tinkling sounds kept coming down from deep under the ground, along with the heavy gasping of those slaves. Those slaves had been carrying baskets of ores up onto the ground, one after another. Large gold and jade pieces were being picked out, carefully and orderly placed aside. Occasionally, a few pieces of fire essence crystal would be found, then the supervising Fire Crow clan's warrior would rush up and collect them, sending these crystals to Jizhua as quickly as they could. Jizhua had stayed in the cold stream valley, helping with guarding the mine and supervising the mining work. In the flat area beside Ji Hao's family house, 5 muscular warriors were fighting against each other bare-handed. Behind their bodies, different colored smokes were rolling in the air, within which, silhouettes of ferocious beasts had been flashing loomingly. These 5 warriors were the strongest warriors amongst Ji Hao's personal slaves, who could break into the senior level anytime. 2 of them came from the Cyan Cattle clan, another 2 came from the Tusk Tiger clan, and the last one of them came from the Gale Eagle clan. Their original names were discarded by Ji Hao, and for convenience, Ji Hao directly called them Big Cattle, Small Cattle, Big Tiger, Small Tiger, and Gale Eagle. Under the heavy rain, the 5 warriors, who had only pieces of beast fur wrapped around their waists, were fighting against each other with all of their power. The muffled punching sound echoed like thunder coming from the sky. The soft raindrops that fell in their vicinity had been hit by the powerful airwaves that was being brought up by their punches, and were darting everywhere like arrows shot by a powerful bow. Their blood vessels had expanded under their skin, and looked like poisonous serpents. All 5 of them were over 3 meters tall. Every single time when they stamped their feet against the ground or waved their fists in the air, a sharp gust of air steam would be brought up and roll the foot. Thick water on the ground up into tens of feet high waves that would splash everywhere. Right where the hearts of Big Cattle and Small Cattle were, in the middle of Big Tiger and Small Tiger's chests and in the stomach of Gale Eagle, a Magus acupoint that shone with eye-piercing lights, could be seen. By fighting with all of their power, they were activating their bloodline powers and stimulating their Magus acupoints as hard as they could, to become powerful senior magi. Ji Hao had promised them that the one who would become a genuine senior Magus first, could select 3 most beautiful females from the Fire Crow clan slaves to be his wives. As for the poor one who would break as last into the senior level, Ji Hao would select the strongest and ugliest women from those female slaves to marry him. Ji Hao had also promised that the first one who would break into the senior level and became a genuine senior Magus, would become the leader of his personal slaves, and their families would get better treatment. So troublesome. Ji Hao dropped the wooden mug and grabbed a few herbs from the basket aside, carefully picking a small leaf and put it in his own mouth, after which he had started to chew slowly on it. The rainy season had just started. Even peak-level senior magi wouldn't risk going out into the jungle in this kind of horrible weather. Ji Hao could only calm his mind down and stay in the house, learning some Qing Yi clan special, secret Magus priest magic from Qing Fu. In only more than half a month, Ji Hao had almost memorized all of the characters and specialties of Qing Yi clan special herbal medicines. For every single kind of herbs, Ji Hao had tasted himself, making him gain a deeper understanding about their functions. During this period of time, Ji Hao had been poisoned by those herbs hundreds of times, many times. If Qing Fu hadn't been at his side and fed him antidotes on time, he might have already been killed by those poisonous herbs. This reminded him of the horrible memory from back when he had been a little kid, and learned all kinds of Magus priest magic and secret sorceries under the supervision of Ji Kuei and other elderly Magus priests. Too troublesome. Ji Hao tried hard to ignore the indescribable and extremely bitter flavor in his mouth, while looking at the 5 slave warriors, and shook his head annoyed. Ji Hao had not thought that once he would take the 105 personal slaves, all of their families would also belong to him and become his slaves as well. He had to take the responsibilities for the food and the daily lives of these hundreds of people all by himself. This made Ji Hao, who had absolutely no other property under his name, terribly worried during such times. Those evil old men must have done this on purpose. At least, they should have assigned me a few pieces of farms or grazing grounds, complained Ji Hao. This many people, how can I just feed them like this? I have to send them to work to raise animals, farming, even picking wild fruits, whatever. But I have nothing at the moment, plus, it's the rainy season, we can't even go hunting. Those old guys must be pestering me on purpose. While he was complaining, a few beams of fiery lights swished over from the south. Led by 3 fire crows, a sphere of blazing, fiery clouds tore apart the raining sky and hovered above the cold stream valley. Along with a resonant dragon call, a fiery flood dragon stepped out the dense fiery light, and slowly descended from the fiery cloud. On the 70 to 80 feet long back of the flood dragon, a middle-aged man, who was wearing a luxury cloak made from golden silk, and body wrapped around by rolling fiery clouds, was sitting on the flood dragon's neck with his head held high and eyes filled with scorn. The man looked down at the cold stream valley, which had fallen in a mess because of the rainy season. A Fire Crow clan's elder, Ji Fong, was standing on the back of the leading Fire Crow, and yelled, "Come, call Elder Ji Zhua out. And Ji Xia, Ji Xia. Where is Ji Xia? Damn, come and greet our guest. Haven't you people seen this lord here?" The fiery flood dragon was floating in the air, without landing on the ground. The middle-aged man, sitting on its back, slowly waved his hand and said, "No need to greet, don't waste my time. This poor place of yours won't have anything good anyway, don't serve anything to me and humiliate yourself. Hurry, 10,000 pieces of fire essence crystals, just hurry." Ji Fong leapt down from the fire crow's back as if his butt had been burnt by fire, while shouting the names of Ji Zhua and Ji Xia. Soon, Ji Hao learned about the purpose of this middle-aged man arrival. The rainy season had been too moist. Some noble had sent his messenger to take 10,000 pieces of fire essence crystals and to inlay those crystals in the walls, in order to disperse the moisture in some temporary manner. 1. Another purpose was, the temporary manor was lacking in working slaves, therefore, the Fire Crow clan got the command to carefully select 3,000 young boys and girls, and send them to work in the temporary manor. The responsibility of escorting and managing those young slaves, and sending them to that manor, had fallen on Ji Hao's head. 1. Temporary manor. Like a vacation manor, for short-term stay and relax.